Every time we talk about the Civil War, you get people who are like, oh, the inbred Arnolds weren't fighting it over slavery, or that wasn't the reason it started, or it wasn't the main reason. States' rights, lost cause, taxation, war of northern aggression. They'll come up with any bullshit excuse they can think of as to why the traitor tots committed an act of terrorism that resulted in the death of over 360,000 American soldiers to try and justify it like it happened for any other more noble reason than the one and only reason they fucking started the war. And that reason's slavery. Full fucking stop. This guy tried arguing that the Civil War was fought because the North didn't want the South to industrialize, which may be the dumbest fucking reason I've heard yet. First off, how the fuck would the North stop the South from industrializing? It's not like the South had to get fucking zoning permits from New York City. If they wanted to industrialize, they could have. And the more northern, southern states were industrializing by the time the Civil War started. But yeah, the Cotton Belt did lag way behind when it came to industrialization. Why might that be? Would it make more sense that the North was somehow magically stopping them? Or they just didn't have a whole lot of interest in investing in industrialization on account of, all the free labor from owning people? You'll hear taxes and tariffs, those are always big ones and equally as stupid, considering that their tax burden was as low as it had been in years. On account of the Tariff of 1857, a tax policy authored and supported by Southern congressmen, which reduced the Walker Tariff by 15 to 24%, and 63% of those tariffs were paid in New York, so it definitely wasn't the South footing the fucking bill. Funny how some things never change. Since the tax policy authored by Southerners had reduced the Southerners' tax burden, taxation is as dumb of a reason as, industrialization. It's always, but states' rights. States' rights to do what, Jim Bob? And the hypocrisy is that they were pissed off about the possibility of them losing their states' rights to own people, while citing as one of the main justifications for committing their treason and terrorism was that northern states were too reluctant to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. So they deserve the states' rights to own people, but then it's, government overreach if other states are like, we're not going to catch the people who ran away from you and send them back. Yeah, they didn't give a fuck about states' rights. And then they call it the War of Northern Aggression, and yet they were the ones who, seized a bunch of federal military installations, and then fired the first shots of the war at a federal military installation. All the while, Lincoln was actively trying to avoid the war. So here's how it all went down, just so there's no more fucking confusion. Prior to Kansas joining the Union, all states joined in pairs, a free state and a slave state. This ensured that the slave states had equal congressional power to free states, and therefore the free states couldn't vote to take away their slaves. Now, Kansas was set to become a state in 1861 by itself. And they decided that they were just going to let the people of Kansas decide if they wanted it to be a free state or a slave state. And the slave states didn't like leaving that up to chance, so they sent a bunch of jackass Southerners up there armed, all in an attempt to intimidate and suppress the people who didn't agree with them from voting. Some things never change. But the people of Kansas weren't about to let a bunch of toothless bigots bully them, so John Brown and a bunch of Kansas abolitionists went and fucked their shit up and then went and voted to be a free state. This meant that the slave states no longer had the voting power to obstruct anti-slavery policy. And they threw a bitch fit about that, and then they committed treason. Here's the thing, it doesn't take a whole lot of historical in-depth analysis and interpretation to really understand the motives of why the slave states started the Civil War. Not a whole lot of, nuance to be had here. Because, being the obnoxious minority that would never shut the fuck up about their backward-ass views, some things never change. They told us exactly why they were doing what they were doing. Like they wrote it down. They wanted everybody to know exactly why they were starting a war. Mississippi's Declaration of Secession, the very first fucking line. Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest in the world. That's how it starts, so they go on to talk about slavery a lot. Not so much about taxes or industrialization or any of that other dumb shit y'all try to justify it with, though. They must have forgot that paragraph. Texas, in their declaration, said the servitude of the African race is mutually beneficial to bond and free, and that slavery is the revealed will of the Almighty Creator as recognized by all Christian nations. They say everything's bigger in Texas, and there's nothing like using God to justify being the biggest piece of shit. Georgia said that they were joining the cause because of the North's fixed purpose to restrain, limit, and finally abolish slavery. And the South, with great unanimity, declared its purpose to resist the principles of prohibition in its extremity. Not to resist the principles of taxation or industrialization. Oh, no, resisting prohibition of slavery. That's why they joined the cause, according to them. In South Carolina, the antebellum lady she is, as not to offend the sensitive palate, she resisted from using the term slavery in her declaration. Said that it was over the property rights of, the 15 states that all had slaves. So I'm gonna say it probably wouldn't take Dr. House to crack the code on which property rights they were alluding to. And it doesn't stop there. There's lots and lots and lots of documentation from those states stating, them themselves that slavery was the whole purpose for doing the thing. That was it. That was the only reason. But those are all the individual states, and their one sole only reason for seceding. Perhaps we should look to the Confederacy as a whole, when it was like cosplaying as a country. Maybe as a united front, it had more noble causes. Let's turn to Alexander Stephens, the Confederate vice president, for clues. His most famous speech, the Cornerstone speech, given right before the war broke out, it was his speech where he explained, what the Confederacy was all about. And he said in that speech, and I quote, "Our new government is founded upon, its foundations laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man. That slavery, his subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition." That is a hell of a mission statement. It doesn't really leave a whole lot of gray area, a whole lot of room for interpretation when it comes to trying to figure out what the fuck they were fighting for now, does it? So there you have it, straight from the traitors' mouths. The Civil War is, and always has been, about one thing and one thing only. A bunch of racist piece of shit Southerners who are too lazy to pick their own cotton and too fucking cheap to pay somebody else to do it. And anybody who argues different is either ignorant or they're a fucking liar trying to twist history to justify the unjustifiable.